Let's go.
George Kilpatrick, inspiration for the nation, celebrating people we feel good about. You may have met this brother before. He was part of the Dream Summit back in August of 2022. Dr. James Peterson is a writer, an educational consultant, content creator, and a PhD. He's got several books out, including the Hip Hop Underground and the African-American culture, among other things, the prison industrial complex. The brother's deep. He's writing for everybody, and you can see his pieces everywhere. His website is jamesbraxtonpeterson.com, out of Philly. Are you a Philly native, though? Is that?
I'm not. I'm actually a Newark, New Jersey native.
Newark,
but
New
I've
Jersey.
been in Philadelphia so long. I feel like a Philadelphian.
You feel like a Philadelphian. So let's get this straight. Right up front, Giants or Eagles? What's the story? What you doing?
So that's a great question for me, right? I'm an Eagles fan, much to the chagrin of members of my family.
Yes.
And that's because I've been in Philly. I went to grad school in Philadelphia, right? And I also raised children in Philadelphia. And I don't know if you've ever lived in Philly, but it's very hard to raise your kids in Philadelphia and they not become Philadelphia fans. So my son loved Allen Iverson, loved Donovan McNabb, and that just got me.
We love Donovan McNabb too. So you get a pass for Donovan McNabb,
right?
You good with him?
I mean, quiet as it's kept, Brother Kilpatrick. Philadelphia has the Eagles have maybe the best history with black quarterbacks, right, of any NFL franchise.
Randall Cunningham and good black quarterback.
Randall Cunningham, Mike Vick, Donovan McNabb, Jalen Hurts.
Right. Okay. Jalen Hurts, member of the American Sci-Fi Fraternity Incorporated.
Yes, he is. Yes,
okay.
He is. Root to the bros. Root to the bros.
But we're coming off, I guess the unofficial start of Black History Month is the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, right? Today, as we speak tonight, by the time people hear this, and see this, is the annual Syracuse University Martin Luther King Jr. Dinner and Celebration, which for many years I broadcast live from what is now, I gotta say this in my head before I say it wrong, the JMA Wireless Dome, right?
Okay.
Now before I even go to the King thing, here's the irony, right? For all the years, it was called the Carrier Dome, right? With no air conditioning. the company that
makes ACs, yes.
No AC in the dome. Now that it's not the Carrier Dome anymore, it is now has AC. So you go figure how all of that worked out.
I don't know.
But I've been thinking, right, in this time where you got the extreme right, you got a lying congressman, and you have people from the election deniers getting key committees in Congress as a backdrop. Where do we think, where is the King legacy as relevant as it should be? Are we past even thinking about what the King legacy is, or what is the King legacy in this time? Like, I'm really struggling with that means, because I know on King Day, I was out with the D9. We did a day of service.
Yeah.
We did what Coretta said. She said, let it be a day on and not a day off. And so I wonder, where does the King legacy fit right now in these times?
Yeah, well, it's absolutely relevant. I mean, the actual legacy of Dr. King is relevant. I'm not talking about the sanitized version that we sometimes see around this time of year, or I'm not talking about the empty statements that some politicians who wouldn't know Dr. King if he spooked them in their own home. I'm not talking about that. So I'm talking about the actual legacy, the legacy of peace, love, justice, the legacy of service, the legacy of putting your life on the line for human rights, the legacy of being anti-poverty activist, right? That's one of the things that gets lost sometimes in the sanitization of Dr. King's legacy. He was anti-poverty, which means that, he might not like some of these clowns in Congress, but I think what he would be most disappointed by in terms of American representative government are the ways in which elected officials police income inequality, the ways in which elected officials get wealthy being elected officials and trade stocks and do different things and own properties and take kickbacks and do all of the things that exacerbate income inequality. And so I think King is as relevant now as he ever was, as long as we understand what that legacy is. And of course, it's the push for civil rights and for human rights, but it is also the goal of eradicating poverty in one of the wealthiest nations in the world. And so, as long as we can accept the full legacy, I think it's absolutely relevant.
Well, what part of that? Because I get it when we and that's why I asked the question: is it relevant today? Because I don't know if we're clear about what part of his legacy or the full legacy it is that we're really fighting for, right? Because when you talk about the anti-poverty or the economic justice piece of that legacy, that part of it isn't as well publicized, promoted, in my view.
Right. Well, just remember where he was and what he was doing at the time of his unfortunate and untimely assassination. Well, where was he at? He was in Memphis. What was he doing? Organizing and working and supporting sanitation workers who were engaged in a movement for workers' rights, essentially, right? So my grandfather was a garbage man, and I say that a lot so people can understand how Black families move from one generation to the next. Well, this also hits home for me in terms of what Dr. King was doing at the time of his death, because he was supporting folks like my grandfather, helping them to get to a living wage and to get working conditions. It wasn't even just a living wage. It was also about the working conditions. It was dangerous working on and operating those sanitation trucks at that particular point in time. And so I think, if you want to think about Dr. King's legacy, think about it in application, right? And so if you want to talk about civil rights, I mean, look what's going on with our voting rights. Look what's happening with women reproductive rights, right? Dr. King's legacy says we have to continue to fight that fight, to continue to push back against the Supreme Court and reactionary politicians who are trying to take away our rights, right? Income inequality is at its worst as it's ever been in my lifetime. You take the city of Philadelphia, which has, 30% poverty rate, right? And even and probably one of the highest concentrated poverty rates in the nation, particularly for a city of this size. People don't have to live like that. We don't have to live like that. We live in a world where there are enough resources for children not to go hungry at night. And there are lots of different ways that we can address that. Some of that's service, some of that is through organizations, but there's a policy piece to it as well that we've got to think through and really put our vote in places where it matters in terms of addressing some of the policy remedies for some of these challenges. So to me, it's just wholly relevant. He's nonviolent, anti-poverty activist. We have so much violence in our communities and in our country and around the world. There's so much poverty in our communities, in our country and around the world. And if we embrace Dr. King's full legacy, then we will embrace the challenge of addressing those things everywhere that we see in every way that we can.
I think as I'm listening to you, embrace the challenge of the full legacy and keep the fight. I think, how does that translate, though? Because the question about relevancy isn't so much whether you and I think it's relevant, it's whether or not we have significantly impacted the lives of the next generation in a way with that message. And I'm thinking anecdotally, right? I don't have the statistics. You're the scientist, so you correct me. Mm-hmm. But it appears to me that for this generation, it's about something else. And you write about the hip hop generation. Mm-hmm. And have we done a good enough job in threading the needle so that what that generation or my generation was fighting for? Well, I think King is a little bit older than me, but I mean, I'm a child of the dreams, so to speak, right? I'm in that next generation. I'm a boomer. And so have the boomers, maybe it's us, have we done a good enough job of translating and transmuting that legacy to our kids who really, they had a Black president, right? And the symbolism of that, right? And if your kid is 8 years old, right, or that's all they knew for many
That's
years, right?
correct.
So have we? When I say relevancy, how I say it without sounding crap, like it seemed like they on something else, and
Yeah,
not that that's better or worse, but it don't seem like they on that per se. I think that's what I think. You help me, just argue with me, fight with me on that. Tell me something.
yeah. I mean, I guess I look at it a little bit differently, right? Which is to say that I don't need for necessarily for young people to like celebrate Dr. King's holiday. I need for them to understand and appreciate all the ways in which they stand on Dr. King's shoulders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the life you have right now is built on movements organized and led by a number of figures, but folks like Dr. Martin Luther King.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have to do is, I think older generations have to model the ways in which we want younger people to embrace that historical legacy. And so young people probably get tired of MLK Day and tired of Black History Month, Black and white, right? They probably like, oh, this is here they go again with this, civil rights stuff, or here they go again with this. That's fine. That's young people's purview to reject sometimes and to rethink the things that we try to pass on to them. However, I want to model for them a life of peace, a life of working towards justice, a life of trying to address and eradicate poverty in our communities. And I think that's the only way. That's the currency that we have. It's our actions, not really our words. And so there's so much talk around MLK Day. Again, people who would never espouse Dr. King's views, people who never represent his ideologies in any kind of political way, will try to claim his legacy and say Happy MLK Day, or they love the content of our character quote, right? The way, to me, the antidote for that is we have to model it. It's not about what we say, it's about what we do. And so I try to carry myself in a way that is peaceful. I try to carry myself in a way that's nonviolent. I try to carry myself in a way that's anti-poverty, right? I want to be working for young people to see that, to understand what the work is, and hopefully for them to be able to embrace some of Dr. King's legacy in that way. But you're right, that people feel disconnected. Listen, we have delivered to them a world where it is easier to talk on screens. It's easier to talk on social media than it is to talk in person. We've delivered a world to them where political discourse is absolutely toxic. We've delivered a world to them where it's okay for children to go hungry at night, where it's okay for countries to invade others and blow up and kill civilians and people. There's a world that they are inheriting from us that is antithetical to Dr. King's worldview, but also reflects poorly on our status as the generations who are in control of what's going on. And so I don't always fault young people for checking out so much, because there's a lot of incentives for them to check out, Brother Kilpatrick. There really are. And the onus is on us to inject hope into that equation, to model the kind of behavior that we want to see. Because a lot of times it's like, hey, do as I say, not as I do, right? And that doesn't work. It didn't work for us, and it doesn't work for young people, right? And so,
right.
I don't want to beat up on the young folks. I feel like, there's a world that they see and that they've grown up in. I mean, think about the environment and climate that they've grown up in, the disasters and the weather disasters and the floods and the fires. Think about the toxic political discourse they've grown in, a Trump presidency and clowns in Congress, absolute clowns in Congress. I mean, think about the lack of access to health care and the gouging of prices around medicines. Think about the global warfare and the invasion of countries and the last stages of Western empires. I mean, what they've seen and what they've experienced is not an invitation to engage and to be informed about what's going on. What they see and what they hear is a whole bunch of noise and madness.
George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, talking to Dr. James Peterson, writer, author, and professor, all of those things. A dookie.
Indeed.
Indeed. So did it sound like I was criticizing the youth?
Well, no, I think you're like, you said they're on something else, and
I didn't say that was a bad thing,
right.
But I'm trying to figure out how do we. So one question is, or one thought is it necessary for us to thread the needle, right? To meld together the civil rights generation to the hip hop generation and make sure that thread is there? Or do we say, all right, we step out of the way, y'all do your thing, y'all do it your way? So that's where I was going at. In other words, not to say that it was better or worse, but it's not the same as we had done it, because, and for maybe for all the reasons why you just laid out, they've come into a different world. They've had more privilege in some ways, but at the same time, we've got all the same issues, right? And so that's what I was really thinking about, is more or less, that's why I said something else. And because
I feel like it's probably both of those things. Like there is some threading that has with to teach and thread the history through. There is some of that. But yet some of our generations, I don't think necessarily, it's not putting it on the boomers. I think Gen X is a little bit this way too, is some generations do have to create space for young people to
step up. That's why I want to lead you there. Thank you. Right. So in other words, is there room for all of us and the respect for you young? And the first thing I'm gonna say to you is, well, you ain't seen nothing yet. You ain't have to walk 3 miles back and forth in the dirt road in the mud.
Right. Well, listen, those are the kinds of conversations I do have with my own children.
Go ahead.
But when I work with young people in the community, I don't approach them that way. You never know what a young person's going through and what's going on in their mind.
Right.
And the reality is if you're trying to help them, either through education or through advocacy, or to bring them along politically, how you're trying to help them, you got to meet them where they are. And anybody who works with young people knows this. You have to meet them where they are, see where they are first, because that's going to give you the right tools to help bring them along. And by the way, this is hard, long-term work we're talking about. Like, this ain't easy. Like, young people we're seeing some data that young people are voting. We're seeing some data.
Aren't voting.
They are. Yeah, they are. They're coming out. I mean, there is.
They made a big impact in these midterms. You better believe it.
Yeah, they did. They came out for the midterms as well. Like, I mean, so I don't see a whole lot of congratulations or a thank you or, hey, you're more engaged than we were talk coming from us, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they are. I think when the issues are presented in a way that's clear, like reproductive rights for women, addressing climate change, wrestling with income inequality, whether that's through student debt or through whatever, those issues resonate with young people, right? And they should.
Right.
But we don't always do a good enough job of making that crystal clear. When you look at cable news, sometimes it just looks like a clown show.
Well, it is, first of all. But at the same time, all right, so let's look at it this way. Where do you see the hope and where you see things working? Because part of what I feel we don't do enough of is celebrate the wins. Yeah, there's some losses out here,
right?
But I don't feel like we celebrate the wins. And so, from your observation, you write for a Black paper. What's the name of the paper in Philly?
The Philadelphia Citizen, which is not necessarily a Black paper. No, it's a solutions-oriented journalistic platform.
Got you. All right.
And so I'm guilty of, just like anyone else, I talk about the problems a lot, Brother Kilpatrick, but my editors at the Philadelphia Citizen challenge me to be solutions oriented. And so I think some of the good energy you see are in organizations that are doing great work. I told you I'm working on this piece on an organization called Level Up Philly that provides wraparound services for some of the most impoverished or some of the kids who struggle with poverty and struggle with some of the violence in our neighborhoods, and they have an impact. There are some churches that are doing a great work. There are organizations that are bright spots in doing the work. Now, unfortunately, the scale is not there, right? We need scale at the level of the federal government for some of the challenges that we face. And I know for some folks, they don't want to hear that, but that's just the absolute reality of it. So there are some bright spots. There are organizations that are doing some good work. Pittsburgh just sent Summer Lee to the House of Representatives, right? The midterms is a bright spot. I know we don't control the House anymore. Democrats rather don't control the House anymore, but given the kinds of people who were running for office, it looks like a pretty big victory that a lot of the election deniers were denied office through the ballot. It shows you the power of the ballot, but also helps to save democracy for a couple more years at least, right? So there's some victories. I think delaying payments, extending the delayed payments on student debt, excellent victory. They need to cancel it, but the delay is a victory. I mean, again, these are small and sometimes Pyrrhic victories, but there are some victories for us to celebrate for sure.
I'm going to challenge you, like the Philadelphia Citizen did, to highlight the wins, yep, even as we know and see the challenges, right? Because sometimes it's hard for us to see the wins, and I don't want to be Pollyanna and say, oh, it's only progress. But if we're sitting on a platform, we have the opportunity to see some things and see the bright lights. You tweet about this, you retweet about all the positive things that you're seeing. My challenge to you, my brother, is to balance. So, celebrate it and then talk about it. Yes, this is great. Now we need more of these, because I'm saying, how can we duplicate the success? I feel like the more we know, the more we have the opportunity to duplicate it. If we don't know, we can't duplicate it, even as we have to walk over bodies in the streets. And that's a sad reality as well.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm writing about organizations a lot, right? So I've been writing about this organization called Level Up. I wrote about a father organization in Philadelphia that just like works with fathers, not necessarily Black, but all fathers in Philadelphia. I try to highlight those organizations, but it's hard, right? Because I'm working on a piece, trying to uplift an anti-violence organization in the same week where Keenan Anderson was tased to death, right, in Los Angeles,
and
right?
he called the police. Can you just give me I don't know the details of that story. How did it end up that someone who called the police, and I don't know why he called the police. Can you just give us the details?
He was in a car accident himself.
Okay.
And law enforcement were either near the scene or close by. So he went to them to try to get help. And there's a lot of different rumors and different stories. I don't have all of the facts, but that's the basis of it as I know. He went to them to get help.
Mm-hmm.
He was a little agitated, I guess, and anxious from the car accident. Law enforcement interpreted that a certain way, and tried to subdue him and arrest him, and they tased him. And it's just to me, it's the same thing all over again. Mm-hmm. Right? Like either a willful or deliberate refusal to recognize the humanity of Black folks in their interactions with law enforcement. We've seen it too many times. There's not been enough reform around it. It's interesting because, man, 5-7 years ago, this Keenan Anderson story would probably be a huge story, but these stories can't even rise to the level
because there's so much else. Yeah.
So much else going on. Also, that just happens so often. It's not news the same way anymore.
And you may have seen this in because I believe it's become a national story. We had an 11-year-old girl in Syracuse, New York, walking. It's about 7:43 at night. She's in a neighborhood where there's a church right on the corner, an elementary school across the street, and a corner store. She's got a gallon of milk. Somebody, she's an innocent bystander, shot dead and killed. A sixth grader who is an honor student, head of her class. And, you know, it haunted me, you know, and I know that this kind of thing I'm not has happened in other cities and maybe, but it was just haunting. And I know, you know, with the police chief and everyone and the superintendent, everyone, it's hard to not think about the promise. And so there was somebody who shot at her. They didn't shoot at her. They were shooting at somebody else who survived, who was not with her. She's just walking home with a gallon of milk. So,
I'm working on a series of stories. In fact, there's one I'm working on now as part of it, that are trying to think about how we might address gun violence a little bit differently, right? You know, there's an important data point that came out of Philadelphia last year, which is, you know, because we tend to think that the shooters are pretty young, at least in the city of Philadelphia. And I think this is probably more accurate than people want to understand. But at least in the city of Philadelphia, a lot of the shooters are actually older. They're in their 30s, right? They're in their 40s. It's not a whole lot of. There are teens who are shooting, but you get in your mind, you think it's all these young black teenage men. That's the data doesn't actually bear that out. And so, why are the preponderance of these shootings in this city, at least, being conducted by mature, grown men, right? And that, to me, is an important data point because it reveals for us some of the structural things we have to address. Now, one, there's too many guns. So there's got to be some kind of retrieval, buyback at a really comprehensive level just to get some of the guns out of there and off the streets. But shooters are facing economic challenges. Shooters are not always mentally healthy, right? There's a rack of services, residential, jobs, healthcare, that we simply do not put in place for those who are, in some cases, have to be pretty well off to access all those things. Those things are not in place for enough of our citizens, and that's why we're getting some of those breakthroughs.
And if they are, we're not accessing them, because I think we do a pretty good job in our community, at least, of making services aware, making people aware. But how do we get people to the services that they need? And maybe that'll be the subject of our next conversation, because we are out of time, my brother.
That's all right. That's all right. That's always a pleasure, man. Always a pleasure.
Come on back and let's talk some more. Let's talk about relationships next time on Inspiration for the Nation.
I am not qualified to talk about relationships. Right?
In community, right? Okay, in community.
In community. There you go. There you go.
Dr. James Peterson, check him out. drjamespeterson.com. Find out what he's up to, what he's doing. And one thing I want to say is I appreciate you, brother, for stopping by here on Inspiration for the Nation.
Always and anytime. Good brother. It's great to see you.
Good to see you too. Inspiration for the Nation.